to join you all. I'm Dee Dee Myers. I run the Governor Newsom of California's Office of Business and Economic Development. And so we are the office responsible for attracting and retaining business and investment in California and creating those good, high-paying jobs that are the holy grail of the work that many of us do. So I'm delighted to be here. It's worth noting that California, first of all, has the fifth largest economy on the planet. We can't say that often enough, and probably everybody in this room has heard that at least 10 times. But we're very proud of that. And of course, our most important international relationship is with Mexico. We have a $95 billion economic relationship with this country, which is why we're here. And so it was a privilege for me and all of us in the governor's delegation to be part of and to witness the inauguration of a new president here, the first woman in the North America, so that was exciting. And to join the U.S.-Mexico Foundation here today for this important conversation about what does the future kind of geopolitical and economic situation look like globally, but then particularly in North America as we gather for this auspicious occasion. So let me introduce we have an august panel here today to discuss that. Let's see, making sure I get everybody in order. Start with you. Emilio Romano is the president of Bank of America Mexico. Henry Krinsky is the founder and managing partner of Discovery Americas, a growth equity firm that's committed to building the next generation of category-defining companies here in Mexico. Torsten Slok, he's a partner and chief economist at Apollo Global Management. And let me just say that Torsten has to leave in a few minutes, so just when he leaves, it's not because he's bored with my questions. And then finally, we have from the great city of Los Angeles, where I live, Erin, who is the Deputy Mayor for International Affairs, handles international affairs, investment, development, and cultural and other kinds of international issues for the city. Which, by the way, and many of you may know this, but Los Angeles has the second largest Mexican population on the planet. So only Mexico City has more Mexicans than Los Angeles. So we're delighted to have you all. Thank you guys all for being here today. So a lot going on, Torsten. Let me start with you since you have to leave. Again, you're chief economist for Apollo Global Management. So just think, sort of take us up to 30,000 feet for a few minutes and talk about what are the geopolitical developments that you think are impacting global markets as we head into new administration here and soon in the United States, and just sort of setting up the next phase of global interaction.
Well, thanks so much, Didi, and thanks so much for having me, of course, also. But the first message, which is very clear, is that the U.S. economy is actually doing quite well. We have a very low unemployment rate at 4.2%. Inflation is under control. We have had very strong growth at 2-3% for the last several years. All this is, of course, implying that U.S. is still having fairly strong tailwind to the economic outlook. This is driven by two key factors. Number one, there is still significant support from the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the Infrastructure Act. We don't see that fiscal support in other countries. The US is on its own in terms of providing a big tailwind, in particular to renewable energy, but also to manufacturing of chips facilities. Second thing that's also very unique for the US is that we have AI investment. We don't see that in Europe to the same degree. We don't see that to the same degree in Canada. We don't see that to the same degree in Australia. AI is also a very strong tailwind. So in the international pecking order of the business cycle, the US is doing really well. And just below US is Mexico, is also doing really well. You have Europe and UK doing a little bit worse. And unfortunately in China, there's significant challenges with demographics, significant challenges with a disinflating housing market, and significant challenges because of the trade war. So the US outlook continues to look good, and Mexico is benefiting also from that.
And so how could political changes potentially affect that as you're looking forward? How are the markets getting ready for that?
Yeah, so we don't know the details of what the candidates will do. We have heard several things. Trump has talked about deportation of 5 million illegal immigrants. He's talked about increasing tariffs. Those things on their own would be inflationary. Harris has talked about a $25,000 subsidy to first-time homebuyers. She's also talked about increasing taxes, including on unrealized tax gains for capital. So there's a lot of different things that have been mentioned. But the key question really is for investors is that we just don't know what they're actually going to do. There's a lot of things that are being talked about, but as we know, when politicians sit down in the chairs, what do they actually do, sometimes can be different from what they actually said. So at this point, Didi, the very important answer to your question is that we just don't know exactly what's coming on the other side of the election, either if it is Trump or if it is Harris.
And is there anything then that investors should do as they prepare for these? I mean, you know, obviously President Sheinbaum was inaugurated yesterday. It'll be another 4 or 5 months before the new president's inaugurated in the United States, so there's still some runway here to prepare. What advice do you have?
Well, I think at least when it comes to the relationship with Mexico, that a lot of the challenges in China and a lot of the issues and tensions between US and China and Europe and China is creating a lot of investment into Mexico. So Mexico is in some sense benefiting from the tense connections that both Europe and the US has with China at the moment. And that's of course good for the outlook for the Mexican economy that continues to do quite well. It is really a very unusual situation in the global economy. Normally, you have US and Europe and Mexico going up and down together, but you really have a decoupling where US and Mexico is ahead of a lot of other countries simply because the US and the US-Mexican relationship continues to be so strong and benefiting so much from foreign direct investment and investment in everything from car plants, semiconductor factories, across the board, manufacturing benefiting the Mexican economy and therefore benefiting also the US and Mexican relationship.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Torsten. Emilio, let me go to you next. Again, you're the president of Bank of America Mexico. So your perspective is both, you know, here in Mexico, but globally, you work for a global bank. How do you see the global economic situation? And so talk a little bit about the sort of global macroeconomic situation, then maybe sort of focus on how that's affecting North America.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Didi, and thank you very much for the invitation today, Enrique and the team of NG. As he said it very well, I think that the economies in the world have developed differently, especially after COVID. The U.S. has been an outlier in the good side. And the thing that's proven in and out is that Mexico has become even more integrated to the U.S. economy. If you see the macro of Mexico is really a macro of a developed economy. It's following very closely the U.S. because of the size of the economy and the integration of the economy, which has never been so close to the U.S. Other places in the world have things that we haven't even touched, like geopolitical risks. Let's not talk about wars. You know, the issue about cost of energy. Who would have thought that Germany was going to be paying 6 times the amount of for gas that Mexico pays, thanks to us bringing the gas from the West Texas with gas pipelines and Germany having relied on Russia. The issue about the foreign disruption on trade and things like that. I think that overall, and he already explained about China, I would say we're fortunate enough, and I say with a lot of humbleness because everything can change, that in North America we have the ingredients, the perfect ingredients, let's say, to a continued development. Within the availability of energy and very cheap energy, the fact that we have a North American Free Trade Agreement, which is a very powerful thing, the fact that the U.S. has decided, not only from a point of view of the strategic value of not having to rely on the cheapest source of your production, which could be anywhere in the world, but the one that you can access to. And as I wish, the president of Guatemala could have said, we deliver to the U.S. by Uber, walking. It's unique. Canada can do it as well, but I always say that Canada is kind of cold. They're nice people, but they're far away. So we have that advantage that we can really deliver without disruption. And then the national security component, which includes national health, which means the North American market cannot live without the APIs or the active ingredients for example, key medical products. They have to be, or medicines, or, face masks, let's call it that way, or even, semiconductors and so forth. So the North American market has proven to have shown that they want to make sure that we are not susceptible to rely on a third party when products cannot be brought in, especially when you're talking about national security of the U.S.
Yeah. And how do we strengthen that as we, again, head into 2 new administrations in 2 of the 3 partners? What can we do to make sure that those relationships remain strong and that the economic ties are deepened and strengthened?
Well, there is many things that come to mind. First of all is that, we're in a transition, and let's say the elephant in the room with many people is what's going to be the policy of Mexico vis-a-vis private investment and vis-a-vis the U.S. And I would say that regardless of our preferred view of more stable public policies on energy and others, on the past years, which, fair enough, it has cost us some kind of confidence and growth. And still, with a, we can argue if the judicial reform is positive or negative. I have my own views. We can discuss that. But on the other, but to be very precise on this element, we do have more uncertainty. And in spite of that uncertainty that we have, the things that actually matter have not changed. And this is the fact that Mexico has, and our president, Claudia Sheinbaum, recognizes that Mexico has now even a more strategic value for the relationship with the U.S. So what I see is whenever there is a matter of really sitting down on the table and figuring out, Mexico does not play around with the relationship with the U.S. And I think the U.S. is the same thing. We're in the politics, and I know we're a very nice case study of making us a case for an election. But at the end of the day, what happened with Trump and what happened with President Biden and Kamala Harris, whoever wins, has been proven already, because Trump was actually, in economic terms, a good president for Mexico. So I think that the interlink between Mexico and the U.S. is so strong and is so fundamental for both countries on the strategic front. Let's not talk about immigration as well and national security as well, that I don't see how they can be derailed. They could be delayed, yes, the integration could take longer because of these things, but I don't see any scenario where they can be derailed for good.
Yeah. Harry, you're at Discovery Americas, obviously. We were talking, and we just heard a little bit about some of the potential theoretical obstacles, but some of them are real. We talked a little bit about some of the challenges that the new President Sheinbaum faces here, a larger deficit, a weaker currency, and the judicial reforms, which have, you suggested good or bad, but how do you think that kind of combination is affecting potential investors as they look at Mexico, and what do you expect?
Yeah, so you have to put this in perspective. What does Mexico accomplish and what Mexico can accomplish? And when I get positive, and I have an optimistic view, I think the floor for Mexico is incredibly high because of the things that Emilio talked about. But the opportunity for Mexico, we should be sitting here talking about the 3 to 4% growth we're going to get this year, and we're talking about the 1 to 1.25% growth that we're going to get this year. And failing to live up to expectations is the risk that I see for Mexico. And a lot of it has to do with what I would call structural issues. Some of them are politically structured issues, and the transition from governments, there's lots of aspects of that, and sometimes the fiscal balance that's transitioned is a little larger than you would have if you were running it for yourself. And there's political complications for this administration. That being said, from June 2nd to now, everything has run exactly to script. If we sat here on June 2nd and said what was going to happen, we would not have any surprises. So I think we need to give time for this administration to clarify what they want to do, and I think it's going to take them some time to clarify, not because they don't have clear views on what they want to do. I think there's constraints on the communication strategy, and Didi, you and the president of Guatemala, if we could do a webinar and maybe help them in explaining the opportunities in Mexico, I think that would be really, really helpful.
And what can though the new government do to better communicate, right? How could they reassure investors and the global business community more easily?
So for Enrique, I think it would be wonderful next year to have the president in a small, informal meeting like this, addressing a crowd in English. I think that would go very far. If you look at places like Brazil and the first Lula administration and other countries that had an incoming leftist-leaning government, there's lots of lessons to be learned about communication. Look, investors at the end of the day, we're very simple people. if you tell us the right thing, we're going to invest a lot more money than if you tell us something different. And there's a balance between politics and what I would call sound, common sense policymaking. And look, this administration ran up the score in politics. It's an all-time political blowout where their political capital is at the highest level. And if I were advising them, you know, use some of that political capital and try to use that to generate policies that will make people in this room and the foreign investor community happy. And I think there's a positive feedback loop. But those things take a lot of political capital and a lot of bravery. And you know, I have faith in this administration. The things I hear in private make me much more optimistic than the things I hear publicly. And I hope that the private conversations are more accurate than the public ones.
So sharing some of that might be helpful over time. So, you know, coming from California, we're a subnational government, but we are a big one. And Los Angeles is a subnational government, but a big one. But one of the things that Governor Newsom and I think many governors and subnational leaders around the world realizes that there's a lot of work that can be accomplished at the subnational level that goes a little to Harry's point, or one of the things that can happen is really improved communication, right? Just building relationships that can help sustain or explain or things, particularly in times of transition. But you oversee everything from, you know, sort of trade and investment and development to the soft diplomacy. So talk a little bit about your role and how you think subnational relations can help in all these contexts, economic and social and political.
No, absolutely. Thank you. And thanks to Enrique and Emilio and everybody at the U.S.-Mexico Foundation for including me today. So my portfolio for Mayor Bass has 3 key areas of focus: international affairs, international relations. So I oversee 91 foreign missions that are based in the LA area, as well as our 25 sister cities, including a 55-year-long relationship with Mexico City. Also, all the inbound delegations, diplomacy, et cetera, all of our city-to-city network and bilateral relationships, and kind of our proactive city engagement on key policy areas like climate action. I also oversee international trade and investment. That's export promotion, foreign direct investment attraction, working really closely with our Chamber of Commerce. Our leader here, Maria Salinas of the LA Chamber, is here today. And then last but not least, I oversee international events. So our preparations for the 2026 FIFA World Cup. We'll host 8 matches in Los Angeles. The 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games, as well as the 2026 NBA All-Star Game, the 2027 Super Bowl. So we have a lot of major events and regular sports and entertainment activities in LA. And so what that means is we not only have a perspective, I mean, we are close to 5,000 kilometers away from Washington, D.C. So we have our own perspective on the West Coast, our own perspective in California and in Los Angeles, informed by the 40 million people that live there, the 20 million people that live in Southern California, and the huge market that we are, right? Not only the 5th largest economy in the world, but Los Angeles on its own, Los Angeles County would be the 17th largest economy in the world on its own. That means we should be in the G20 if we're having this conversation, right? So there's a perspective that we have to offer, there are values that we have to communicate that I think really drive how we engage with the world and the things that we need to talk about and want to talk about with our partners. And that starts on a city-to-city level, but we've also done it at city to national government, right? City to state governments or territories. And there's huge amounts of engagement that happens on very substantive matters that relate back to the priorities and the values of Angelenos and of Californians that help drive our economy. California's been way out ahead in clean air policy, right? That started decades ago and has really set the market for the U.S. as a whole. And so I think we continue to lean into that strength and try to use that to drive our engagement and our subnational engagement in particular.
And as I mentioned at the start, Los Angeles has a large Mexican and Mexican-American population. How does that affect the dialogue between, you know, Los Angeles and Mexico, but also the U.S. and Mexico? What are the opportunities around that shared community?
Yeah, it means that it's tough to plan a delegation to Mexico City, right? Because everybody wants to come. Yeah. So first and foremost. But I think we're a community where 2/3 of our population in Los Angeles are immigrants or the children of immigrants. 40% of people in Los Angeles speak a language other than English at home, right? So we were joking that Spanglish is the unofficial language of Los Angeles, but it's true, right? So this is a key part of our identity in Los Angeles, and it's a key part of how we think about the world. So I mentioned my portfolios for Mayor Bass, but I didn't mention that I'm the only deputy mayor of international affairs in the United States. That shows how much Los Angeles is invested in developing a subnational diplomacy effort, right, a city diplomacy effort, and how committed we are to living our international identity in the work that we do and in how we engage. So I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity both between US and Mexico, and even despite our sister city, or I should say, in addition to our sister city relationship, right, we have had over the years lots of engagement with the Ebrard administration, with the Sheinbaum administration, right, heading into now La Presidenta, right? It's very important for us. Mayors often have other jobs next, right? And so it makes sense that we engage at a subnational level and build that trust between cities, that actual engagement on projects where we share values and share priorities, and then really develop those relationships and the ties that come from that. So it's not just a public to public, not just a government to government relationship, but really a private sector engagement, a community-based organization to community-based organization, civil sector engagement. It's incredibly important to build those ties. And my kind of selling point overall on subnational diplomacy and the investment in it is that a rope is stronger with more threads, right? So it's harder to cut those relations if you have a stronger rope.
Yeah, and you made the point that mayors sometimes go on to other jobs, and we're 2 for 2 here in Mexico, right, with the mayors of Mexico City. So really interesting opportunity to build on those relationships. But so, I mean, and we have so much interconnectedness between border states like California and Mexico, and we're seeing that increase with the increased focus in the U.S., right, on reshoring supply chains through the CHIPS Act, through IRA. But so, and that's obviously created a large, not just a conversation around nearshoring, but a lot of industry around nearshoring. But what are the, so talk, Harry, talk a little bit about the pluses and minuses of nearshoring for a country like Mexico. And then you got, I mean, feel free to, let's just open this up and have a conversation. Everybody's sort of had a chance to, you know, sort of share some thoughts, but feel free to comment on each other's comments as we go forward here.
So, as almost everybody in this room knows, nearshoring is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for Mexico. And it's largely a macroeconomic opportunity. The micro is actually very, very complicated and has come up with perverse outcomes related to currency and labor cost inputs. And what you need to see is how we take that macro shock for Mexico and convert it and take advantage of it, and how the government prioritizes that as an outcome. And I think that's the real challenge. It's going to happen, and it's happening, and it's like the force of gravity, and we see it everywhere in the economy. And I would shudder to think what Mexico would look like right now without nearshoring, this trend taking place. And I think it paves the road for at least very decent outcomes in the adverse cases. I don't know how you look at it.
Yeah, well, Harry, I think that you said it very well. I think that the issue of nearshoring clearly is being seen, and it's not like we found like gold for the first time. You know, nearshoring is really, in 1987, Mexico was a closed economy. The closed economy model worked until it stopped working. Mm-hmm. And when it stopped working, it really was a disaster. Trust me, 95, 98, 85, 87, those that have the age that I have, I say a few of my colleagues here will remember, we don't want to be back there. Mexico changed for good. We opened to the world economy. And I don't think anybody is thinking to go back. Actually, Mexico and this government that just left was the one that asked the U.S. not to cancel USMCA. It was the one that was saying to the government of President Trump, let's keep going. You know, so the strategic value of being an open economy is, I don't see anybody questioning that.
We're not going back.
We're not going back. So that's one thing. The second thing is that Mexico also has to, well, we lost an opportunity because the U.S. decided to invite China to the WTO, and we didn't like that. Actually, we have some people here from the trade ministry here that we were the last ones to support that move because we were not, China had a 30 cents an hour salary. We had a $2 an hour salary at that time. Currently, by the way, China is at $7 and we're still at $3 an hour. So you see the point. Well, at that time, we were so not competitive against China. China really took a lot of the thrust, I think more than they should because of the strategic value of the supply chains. And now, this day, we're still very cheap on labor. So if we see that, I think that this government has really attended things that I personally think we didn't put enough priority before. And we're paying the price in a way, but it's good that it's being done, which is we cannot provide just for stability for investment. We have to really provide for a better lifestyle of the Mexicans. That's why 60% of the Mexicans voted for this government. And that's why this government is providing the ability to really build upon, because the people in Mexico are celebrating a new government because this government has provided better salaries, better pensions, a better perception of themselves. If you go to LA, I speak with my colleagues from Mexico and LA, and they feel they're very happy with this government because they felt like their prestige, themselves are being revalued.
Yeah.
So I think that this had to happen. And now, from now on, what I think is that for the USMCA and nearshoring to accelerate, because it's a process that keeps going. First of all, we're still cheaper than China on wages per hour, not productivity, because Chinese people they like sleep in the machines. They work. You have to ask them not to come to work. So it's a different mentality, but we're still attractively from the point of view of relocation here. And the things that need to happen are stable macro, which frankly is also one of the positives of this government that left. It was a relatively healthy macro behavior, and which is shown by the many factors. And the other thing is planning the infrastructure, which I think is the biggest issue that we see as also stability on the public sector. But the planning the infrastructure is making sure that we have enough water, enough electricity, especially ports and airports and so forth. I was pretty happy to see that President Sheinbaum, as expected, is coming with a very well thought through way of converting Mexico to renewable energy and to the ability to have our own energy. The fact that Pemex is only going to be doing 1.6 million barrels, I don't know if it was noted, but I think it's a pretty interesting idea. Because you keep, you don't make Pemex great again in a way, just keep it as it is, and make sure that we invest in our future through other means. So I would say I'm cautiously optimistic that we're setting the tone for the nearshoring going forward, not as organized as we should have. So there is some kind of opportunity, cost of opportunity. But I have no doubt in my mind that we are moving forward, and the main actors of Mexico see this as something that there's no way back, and it's something that's clearly very important for Mexico.
Yeah.
If I could just add on to that, I think your point on infrastructure is well taken. And I think thinking about how we finance infrastructure is incredibly important because we can do it at the national level, but at the subnational level, cities are the ones that often drive infrastructure investment in public works. And cities often don't have access to capital in the same way that national governments do. In some cases, national governments require approval of subnational lending, subnational debt. Right, so what are we doing as well, right, when we talk about that stability and looking to create that opportunity through infrastructure development, opening up the financial markets to allow for subnational governments to have more access?
Just to build on that, markets matter. And the private sector matters. And if you created a Venn diagram of what this government wants to accomplish and what the private sector wants to accomplish, and you look at the overlap, the only way anyone's going to get happy in either this government or in the private sector is to focus on that overlap and try to figure out ways to make it work, because the access to capital has been the problem in Mexico. In the last administration, I would say, there was not a favorable outlook for foreign investment. We invest money largely from the pension system in Mexico, and the trips through foreign investment to get approval for every one of our acquisitions is a long process that needs to be addressed. And we're not foreigners. From the point of view of the government, we shouldn't be viewed as foreigners, and it's a problem. And so, I mentioned before that nothing changed from June 2nd to today, at least in the, call it in the economy, but markets changed a lot. The Mexican market underperformed global markets by 25%. We were down about 16, 17% in dollars, and the rest of the world rose about 7 or 8%. The peso fell 13%. The spread between US interest rates and Mexican interest rates, if you look at peso rates and dollar rates, they spread out by about 38 basis points. And 38 basis points for people not in the financial markets, that's not very much. If you take 50% of GDP, which is the government debt in Mexico, and you tack on 38 basis points to the fiscal adjustment process that we need to go through, that's a problem.
And what caused all that?
So depends how you look at it. So I think there were some changes that, again, on June 2nd, we all knew what they were, but the market took time to price them in. And I think the communication strategy is really, really important. And domestic politics and foreign investment have different messaging, and you have to choose the policy, the place you're going to go and make your bet. And so far, on the back of a landslide outcome in the elections where we've never seen somebody win the presidency by so much and have absolute majorities in all the houses, the vote to keep politics winning at politics and deprioritizing investment and giving a little bit of airtime to it. And I think in the inauguration, there were some good things that came out of it. But that balance has to change. And when we have companies, we set up KPIs and we say, what do we need to track as a company? On a country, knowing how your currency performs against other currencies in your equity markets, there's information. And I think hopefully over time, the government puts these KPIs because they relate back to your point about investment. And if we get foreign investment to address the places where we have constraints in nearshoring, and there's lots of opportunities to make a lot of money from that, we're going to change that conversation to the 1.2% growth to the 3 to 4% growth if we do that, or if we don't, we're going to be crying about missed opportunities.
As a former political communications professional, let me just say, threading that needle between addressing the the people and the markets is always a challenge. But one of the clear opportunities is, and I say that with love and respect, how hard it is. But one of the opportunities, in spite, I thought it was President Arevalo said there's three things you need, right? You need the rule of certainty around the rule of law, you need infrastructure, and you need workforce. But you also need energy. And you mentioned, Emilio, that one of the things that had benefited Mexico was the pipelines from South Texas, right, providing an ample supply of natural gas. But this president seems to have signaled, right, given her background as an energy engineer, that obviously she wants to move a little more aggressively into clean energy. So what are the opportunities that you see around that as an economic opportunity?
Well, that's a very good question, Didi. I think that's why I'm confident that the energy is not necessarily going to be. It's not always going to be planned. Let me give you an example. When you go to Changi Airport in Singapore, they're building a new airport, right? A new 100-gate airport. Harry's an airline guy, and they haven't even filled this one. And they say, well, in 40 years we need another terminal, right? We're the other way around. We needed like another airport, like pretty much 50 years ago. So planning the infrastructure is not going to be our forte because, we basically, we have other priorities. So that's not going to work perfect as you would expect. But the constraints that we have on the public sector, public finances, the 54 of having CFE, having 46, 54, and then 46 private, all those things that have been put there, and the lack of public capital to invest, and the complete vision of Claudia Sheinbaum of making Mexico in the forefront, a country in the forefront of renewables, makes a combination that I think is very doable and very palatable, which is private investment, for sure, there's no other way, and substitute fossils against renewables. But there is so much we can do, because we also have the cheapest source of power in the world, and gas in Mexico, natural gas, is pretty green. It's not renewable, but it's green. And we also have the gas that is being disposed by Pemex, which we can recapture as well, which can substitute the combustóleo, the heavy oil that we're still using once in a while. So I think that is, for me, something that will happen, not necessarily in a perfect scenario, but I would say that if you focus, Harry was saying very well what happened from June to today, but if you see it in the 6-year time frame, 12-year time frame, these past 6 years were actually one of the best years for clients in Mexico, and financial-wise. And I had a meeting with a CFO of a bank in Spain and said, "Are you Mexicans in the same mood as always? First year, 3 years." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "First 3 years you're screaming and moaning about the government, whatever. The other 3 years are catching up because of the lost opportunities you didn't see in the first 3 years." So in a way, we have our own style. I don't think the business community was very confident that the past 6 years would have a peso at this level and the stability that we had and the business growth that we had. So we have to be also mindful that what we're talking here about has very little to do with the fact that we have, for example, here, the industrial real estate owners here seated at that table. They can tell you they have zero vacancy, or maybe 0.2%, I don't know. And the rent increases are very, very measured. I don't think but they cannot have enough capability. Emilio is another example, to host the amount of business that's relocated to Mexico. And also, let's put that in perspective. And for the most of those businesses, there are not concessions and things. What we're talking about, politics and things, is kind of like not very relevant, right? And the other thing is, of course, it's relevant, but not that relevant. And the other thing that we also have to be mindful with respect to this discussion is that at the end of the day, this country has the infrastructure, the location-wise, to make sure that we are in the long term, and we are in the long term part of the U.S., but we do not need to change the world dynamics too much to make Mexico a developed economy. For each share, 1% the share of U.S. imports that Mexico get, we're now at a 16%. If we get 17%, Mexican GDP grows 2%. So we don't need to destroy China or rebalance the world. We need a little bit of the world trade and economy for Mexico to become a developed economy. So that's why we're, cautiously optimistic on the future of Mexico.
Yeah.
If I could jump in on the sustainability question too. I mean, so obviously California is a leader in that space, and in particular in Los Angeles, we have huge investments in the blue-green economy. So everyone thinks of Los Angeles for entertainment, as you know, and worked in for many years, and it is a huge and foundational industry as part of LA. But we're also the national leader in advanced manufacturing. We have a massive blue-green economy. And when we talk about that with a subnational diplomacy lens, the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, the largest port complex in the Western Hemisphere, through which 40% of all goods entering the United States enter the US, right? 40% of all goods, yes. We now have a relationship with multiple ports in Asia to establish green shipping corridors between the two. So the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach are working really closely with Shanghai. And we set the goal of putting a zero-emission ship on the corridor by 2030, which is really ambitious, in greening not just the corridor itself and the shipping lanes, but also portside operations on both ends and digitizing those respective market spaces. So we are actively engaged at the city level in those types of city-to-city relationships that can really drive markets, hopefully, and drive new investment in a place like shipping, right? Which is a pretty, at this point, one of the world's largest emitters is the shipping industry. I think it's like the 9th largest emitter in the world collectively.
And it's something that we have to do together, right? On both ends of the shipping routes, but also as contiguous nations in North America. Let's do one quick, since we're here in Mexico City at this auspicious moment, just one thing that you're most hopeful about for the future of Mexico. And I'll ask each of you that question as we wrap up.
Okay, well, I'll say I'm very much looking forward to Copa Mundial in the 3 countries, opening here in Mexico. And I'm really looking forward to opportunities that we have as North America to celebrate our connectivity to not just have visas that make it easy for people to move between the three countries during games time, but actually to create those types of passports and cultural connectivity that celebrate our partnership over many, many years. So I'm looking at all of those opportunities now.
I'm looking at a structural setup, which is one of the all-time great structural setups. There's a lot of execution risk, but we have a new set of leaders in Mexico that, whatever their political ideology is, they're thoughtful people. And I have hope and optimism that they take this structural setup and use it to their advantage, which will be to the advantage of all of us.
I have a tactical and a vision. The tactical is very simple. Bank of America is the global sponsor of the World Cup. So I wish that with LA we can welcome all of our clients. So if you're not our client, maybe you want to think about it. We're a global sponsor, so you might want to rethink your strategy. No, but on the serious stuff, well, this is serious. For us, soccer is pretty serious. So I think that my wish would be for the U.S. and Mexico to really understand each other on the strategic side. Because when we talk about immigration, there is no solution to immigration other than, President of Guatemala said, investment. And Mexico is part of the solution. Now we're not the immigrating people. And immigration is not bad. Actually, it's a very good thing if we can manage it. We haven't talked about violence and the drug issues. The drug issues, we can spell out the reasons why we're in the situation we are in Mexico. And if we don't recognize each other's situation, we're not going to be able to fix it. And we can have Mexico be anywhere you want, but you don't want to have Mexico in a situation where we cannot stand by ourselves, protecting the U.S. and protecting ourselves and our people. So we need to work together. And third, on the trade side, on the strategic side around the world, I think that Mexico could be a higher priority on the geopolitical side of the U.S. I understand why the U.S. had the Marshall Plan after the Second World War. I understand why the U.S. is all involved in the Middle East and Russia, whatever. But Mexico, we've always been there and kind of been, I wouldn't say take it for granted, but we could get a little bit more tender, loving care from our big brother up north. And I think that will be great because we have to work together on the problems, and we have to understand that the good and the success of one country is very important for the other.
Yeah. There's so much good that can come by bringing our nations closer together, both economically and diplomatically and culturally. So thank you all. Thank you, Emilio. Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Erin. Thank you for being here. And thank you to the U.S.-Mexico Foundation for hosting us today. Thank you all.